What up, though? Oxford English Dictionary. Negro. Etymology. Either a borrowing from Spanish or a borrowing from Portuguese. Spanish, negro. Portuguese, negro. Spanish, negro, black person, 15th century, 1207, as adjective in sense black, or Portuguese, negro, black person, 1460, end of 13th century, as adjective in sense black. Compare French, negre, negre. Italian, negro, 1532, as adjective with reference to race attested earlier in sense black, 13th century. 1555, a member of a dark-skinned group of peoples originally native to sub-Saharan Africa, a person of black African origin or descent. In earlier use also applied to other dark-skinned peoples, especially Moors. The term Negro remained the standard designation throughout the 17th to 19th centuries and was still used as a standard designation preferred by prominent black American campaigners such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington until the middle years of the 20th century. With the rise of the Black Power movement in the 1960s, the designation black was reclaimed as an expression of racial pride, and since then the term Negro, together with related terms such as negress, has fallen from favor and is now typically regarded as out of date or even offensive in both British and American English. Negro is still, however, used in positive context as part of the names of certain organizations, particularly the United Negro College Fund, and in historical context with reference to baseball's Negro Leagues. 1555, they are not accustomed to eat such meats as do the Ethiopians or Negroes. Okay, now we're reading the usage of the word Negro put into context. And as you can see, the references that these sentences come from are listed. Feel free to look those up and expound on your knowledge. 1580, in all Guinea, the black people called Negroes do use for money certain little snails. 1782, his coat of mail made his skin as black as a Negro. 1906, Professor Booker T. Washington being politely interrogated as to whether Negroes ought to be called Negroes or members of the colored race, has replied that it has long been his own practice to write and speak of members of his race as Negroes, and when using the term Negro as a race designation to employ the capital N. 1973, upon spotting the Afro-Americans, the Ghanaians shouted out, "Hey, Negro." The other retorted angrily, "I'm a black man, not a Negro. Don't call me Negro." That sounds pretty ridiculous because, in essence, Negro means black. But programming and indoctrination are powerful tools. Just like at the beginning of the sentence, it said, upon spotting the Afro-American, which I assume Afro is a reference to African and or Afro, which is the so-called hairstyle of the Americans, which isn't a hairstyle at all. our hair just reaches toward the sun, just as the new plants, the new um, plants that have just germinated reach toward the sun, connotates growth. Let's shake it. 1902, there are many instances of Negroes tenderly caring for their former masters and mistresses who for some reason have become poor and dependent since the war. Negroes caring for their former managers or supervisors. 1666 to 1855, in extended use, a dark or black type of animal or plant, also a black color. So as you can see, black, Negro, synonymous. 1666, which are both misnomers because there are no black humans. 1666, also a kind of fish called Negroes or sea devils, which are large and have a black scale. 1698, the outward skin was a perfect Negro, the bones also being as black as jet. 1797, a white kidney bean, black Negro of the same, scarlet of the same, Encyclopedia Britannica. A white kidney bean, black Negro of the same, speaks to how in the 1828 American Dictionary of the English Language by Noah Webster, one of the definitions of the word black is pale or bleached. 1855, Negroes and Nigos, provincial names of the caterpillars of the turnip sawfly. 1704 to 1884, a creolized form of English, also English as used by African Americans, properly Americans. 1834 to 1878, Australian, an Aboriginal person, also occasionally New Zealand, a Maori person. 1834, it is probable that the Negroes of New Holland have extended into the Australian continent by New Guinea and the Eastern Islands, and that the migration has been made from the coast of Africa. 1859, the district is thinly populated by innumerable small tribes of blacks, whom some call Malays, others Australian Negroes. Negro seems to be synonymous with dark brown complexion, also with features. Also with status. 1593, but ultimately interpretation, perception. 1593, belonging to a dark-skinned group of peoples originally native to sub-Saharan Africa, formerly frequently with implication of being a slave. In early use, also more generally dark-skinned. So when it mentions formerly frequently with implication of being a slave, this speaks to the status aspect of it. If you are working / slaving / laboring / have employment and you are laboring for someone else and not you and your family, you are considered a black. The blacks, you are considered a black. 1761, a Negro man attacked a Negro wench and would have killed a Negro boy. 1858, the Negro women working in the hot cotton plantations. The Negro women working, slaving, laboring, a job. 1984, he wasn't Negro or mulatto. He was a port of Spain Indian. He wasn't Negro or mulatto. He was a port of Spain Indian. 1879, the Negro tribes have never extended north of the Sahara. 1950, if any individual group or segment of Negro society uses the advancement of Jackie Robinson in baseball as a triumph of race over race, I will curse the day I signed him. This was from the Saturday Evening Post, May 20th. 1661, the enclosed shell of the cocoa nut whose Negro skull is not easily broke. The enclosed shell of the cacao nut, the cocoa nut, whose Negro skull is not easily broke. Cacao. Dark brown. Like espresso. 1912, Negro songs have always been popular among us, and deservedly so. For sure. 1965, according to Downing, Negro cloth called cassinet in the northern market, linsey and satinette best suited the Mississippi cotton planters. Negro cloth, the Mississippi cotton planters. 1670, since my last here arrived a Negro ship, but the Negroes were so sickly that I was loath to meddle with them. 1670. Let it sink in. 1733, designating a building or accommodation inhabited by black slaves on a plantation in the southern states of America. 1733, also, to be sold, a plantation, good pasture, barn, Negro houses. Even has Negro houses, even has houses on the plantation, on the land, on the earth soil portion for the workers. In extended use, black or dark in color from 1816 to 1864. A few more definitions, or how Negro would be used during different times, and what people of those times were saying, based on Oxford English Dictionary online, the edition that requires a subscription. You pay that scratch, you get a little closer to the truth. Let's shake it. 1631, white Negro, a person of black African ancestry who has a light or albino complexion. White Negro, 1631, a person of black African ancestry who has a light or albino complexion. Negroland, 1658, Black Africa. Also, the Southern United States. It's a lot to unpack in this particular statement or definition. It's a lot to unpack, but I won't. 1670 through 1884, Negro's head, a tropical American palm, the fruit of which is a source of vegetable ivory, nautical slang, a brown loaf. The truth is there, it's not hidden. It just requires you to think for yourself. You can say critical thinking, but let's keep it simple. Think for yourself. What makes sense? You were born endowed with certain for lack of a better word, adornments in terms of being able to navigate where the place you were born into. Use them. Maybe adornments was the wrong word, but hey, I never proclaimed to be smart. Negro head, 1781, more fully, Negro head tobacco, a strong dark plug tobacco. Why is tobacco associated with Negroes when we've always been taught that it was associated with Native Americans? Why is it associated with Negroes, with black people, black Americans, African Americans, colored, mulatto, Indians, Native Americans? It's always associated with the Native American, but you're not associated with the Native American. Rightfully so. I mean, why would you need to call yourself a Native American? We'll stick to American. Dark plug tobacco, not Newport. Negro pot, 1818. Caribbean, a deep, heavy cast iron pot, a Dutch pot, a Dutchie. Now also in Jamaica and Guyana, a rich stew cooked for a folk celebration. A rich stew cooked for a folk celebration. Pass the Dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the Dutchie on the left hand side. Make me jump down, down. Make me jump down, down. Pass the Dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the Dutchie on the left hand side. 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof by J.A. Rogers. Beethoven, the world's greatest musician. Damn. This is unbiased. Beethoven, the world's greatest musician, was without a doubt a dark mulatto. He was called the Black Spaniard. His teacher, the immortal Joseph Haydn, who wrote the music for the former Australian national anthem, was colored too. The Grimaldi, a Negro race, lived in Europe as late as 12,000 years ago. 2 complete Grimaldi skeletons are in the Museum of Monaco near Monte Carlo. Abundant traces of their culture have been unearthed in southern and central Europe. And the museum will no doubt get in touch with the family members of that skeleton. Wait for it. Wait for it. Negroes lived in America thousands of years before Columbus. Central American monuments show numerous carvings of them as gods. The first white men to reach the American mainland tell of seeing Negroes. Of course they did. We was chilling in the woods, listening to Howlin' Wolf. Columbus, who visited South America, said that he had heard of them there. The present Negro race, Columbus, who visited South America, said that he had heard of them there. Who told Columbus? It was some niggers up there in America. Who told him? The boy knew before he got here. The present Negro race of Africa perhaps did not originate there, but Asia and Oceania. In the United States Army drafts in World War I, the Negro proved physically fitter than the white man. For every 100 men physically examined, the ratio of colored men found physically qualified for general military service was substantially higher than the ratio of white men by just 5%. George Washington Carver of Tuskegee Institute. Tuskegee Institute. Tuskegee Institute. Warrior Institute. George Washington Carver of Tuskegee Warrior Institute, one of the world's greatest agricultural chemists, was awarded the Roosevelt Medal in 1939 for distinguished service in the field of science. From the peanut, he has extracted 285 products, and from the sweet potato, 118. The only thing you extracted from a peanut was a sandwich. Dr. Carver was born a slave. Of course, he was born a slave. He was born a worker. He worked for his family, probably on their farm. I'm not emotional. I'm just so sick of seeing everybody who was born possibly in the 1800s was born a slave. This is the common narrative. And it's just not true. Look it up for yourself. Matter of fact, start with your own family. Thomas Edison once offered him a large salary. The man born a slave. Dr. Carver was born a slave. Thomas Edison then offered him a large salary to take charge of one of the Edison laboratories, but Carver refused. You former slave, how you refuse to take a salary? Come work for me. You former slave refused in order to continue to work he had begun with Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee, at Warrior Institute, Bama. Let's go up here. The founder of the city of Chicago was Baptiste Point du Sable, a Negro, in 1779. The founder of the city of Chi-Town. The Chi, a Negro. Baptiste Point du Sable, a Negro, in 1779. We'll cut to the American Library Association, since we were talking about Du Sable in Chicago. The Chicago area is located on ancestral lands of indigenous tribes. The Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi nations, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. These tribes have had thriving trade networks in the Great Lakes area prior to European contact. These tribes had thriving, meaning it just didn't happen yesterday. It just didn't happen the day before the Europeans got there. They had thriving trade networks in the Great Lakes. And Du Sable, 1779, Du Sable founded Chicago. Huh? Take a little more to put all that stuff together, but it can be put together. You can figure it out. Go ahead. Don't be lazy. Don't be lazy. Reciprocal trade relationships between the tribes and Europeans helped maintain the tribal hold on the Illinois area around Lake Michigan throughout the 1700s. Du Sable, 1779, throughout the 1700s. Illinois around Lake Michigan. We talking Chicago here. Let's shake it. The War of 1812 significantly affected the relationship between the indigenous tribes in the Great Lakes area with the British and the United States. Immigrants. The Treaty of Ghent, which was written between the British and the United States. Didn't have nothing to do with the indigenous people. Didn't have nothing to do with us. Didn't have nothing to do with the Americans. Had to do with the British and the United States, which was essentially the British. So it could be the British and the British and the English. Immigrants, following the war, felt like a betrayal to the tribes who had fought alongside the British against the United States government. He got in the bed with them, got in bed with them. They was your homies. But they had a strategy. On May 28, 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, proposing to relocate indigenous tribes west of the Mississippi River, which was just game on game on game, pimping and hoes. In 1893, Chicago put on the World's Columbian Exposition, which is quite interesting to me. In a way, I want to stop this show right now and go look up World's Columbian Exposition and really dig into that. Interesting stuff. Word spread across the country that American Indians in 1893, DuSable, Chicago, 1779, 1700s, the tribes, the families, indigenous people had great trade networks that were thriving in the 1700s. DuSable founded Chicago as a Negro in 1779, it says, give or take a year, whatever. Word spread across the country that the American Indians would be able to present themselves through exhibits. The endeavor was headed by one of America's first anthropologists, Harvard University professor Frederick Ward Putnam. As David R.M. Beck stated in Unfair Labor, the representations of American Indians at the fair fall into 5 categories. Indians as they wanted themselves to be known and understood, Indians as objects of science, Indians as assimilating into American society, United States society. America is the soil. Indians as romantic images and actors reflecting a bygone era, and Indians as savage and wild representations of America's past. The savage Indians of Chicago. The savage American Indians of Chicago. Who be they today and yesterday, and when you was a shorty, and when your mama's mama was there? They wasn't wearing afros, they was wearing naturals. The fair was claimed by Carl Smith to be the most successful of all world's fairs, but in reality, it reinforced many stereotypical ideas about the American Indians that would continue to color public perception in regard to the United States government's Indian policy. See, they have no problem with saying the United States government, but then they'll try to say the American assimilating into American society, and then they say to the United States government's Indian policy. See, America is the soil, is the so-called land. The United States is the occupier. And today, the occupier is very strong. Why? Because the actual people that are occupied are members of the occupier's military. Let's shake it. Through the late 1800s to the early 1900s, children were being taken from their tribes and sent to boarding schools with the mission to assimilate them into white society, into European society, into United States citizen society. The policy was unwittingly supported across party lines. Both liberals and conservatives alike assumed that it was in the Native Americans' best interest. See, now we go to Native American. See how the labels change? You change the label, you change the people. You change the perception. You change the language. You change the emotion. In reality, the children faced emotional and physical abuse in an attempt to kill the Indian, save the man. If you want to know about yesterday, take a look at today. Believe your eyes. Individuals from reservations were offered training and relocation into cities, Chicago being heavily favored. What the Native Americans did not realize was that the training that they had been given was sometimes an outdated machinery and in fields that they would not learn skills they could take back to their reservations. The housing provided was rejected by most and considered slums in Chicago. Philio Nash, who was Commissioner of Indian Affairs from 1961 to 1966. You see that? 1961 to 1966. We were just talking about the 1700s, late 1700s, stated that Meyer's relocation program was essentially a one-way bus ticket from rural to urban poverty. Now, the housing provided was rejected by most and considered slums in Chicago. Projects. Through all of these attempts at taking care of what was often referred to as the Indian problem, Chicago has maintained a thriving, diversely populated indigenous population. Through all of these attempts, listen, please, sheesh. Through all of these attempts at taking care of what was often referred to as the Indian problem, Chicago has maintained a thriving, diversely populated indigenous population. Chicago today has the third largest urban Indian population in the United States. Did you go to school with a Native American? Did you see a Native American at the store? Was you on a basketball team with a Native American? Did your Native American homie live on the block? You lived on the 15th floor of the projects. Did your Native American homie live on the 13th floor? But did your indigenous American Indian homie live next door? Maybe. The person who wrote this article, oftentimes we speak about these things, we need to actually see these people who are speaking of these things, who are in charge of the narrative. And I'm not blaming them for being in charge of the narrative. And I'm not saying that, hey, we were bamboozled, we should be a part of the narrative too. We should write his story. How can you write his story when you haven't even wrote your story? This is Tara Kinjokedy. Tara Kinjokedy is part Seneca Nation and an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. She received her Bachelor's of Arts in Anthropology in 2002 and her Master of Science in Library and Information Science in 2008 from Indiana University. Tara Kinjokedy is part Seneca Nation and an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. It's funny when I see Seneca Nation, and I'm not trying to associate the two of what I'm about to say, but when I see Seneca Nation, it reminds me of when some of my people used to live in the projects on the 11th or the 15th floor. I can't really remember. It's been so long ago. And the people next door we was all considered, we was basically all family because they lived right next door. And one of the shorties who was our age, name was Seneca. And you know, he would be one of those people who you would call red because he had the red tint to his hair. And although he was light skinned, he had that red tint to his skin. And his name was Seneca. And Tara Kenjockety is part Seneca Nation. This is from IMDb, Tara Kenjockety biography. So, just a little bit more. I mean, we don't know this woman, but this is what the biography says about Tara Kenjockety. Was born November 27, 1978 in Chicago Heights, Illinois. She grew up in South Bend, Indiana. Tara is the oldest daughter of Thomas and Adrian O'Keefe. Tara's three younger siblings are Kelly Ramesh O'Keefe, Lauren Cohen, and Joseph O'Keefe. Tara has been a technology specialist instructor with the South Bend Community School Corporation adult education program since 2011. She also does presentations to train instructors in technology integration in the classroom. Tara enjoys acting, singing, storytelling, and her work in adult education, adult nurturing, adult nourishing. Indiana Capital Chronicle. We're not done with Tara Kenjockety and Seneca Nation and whatnot. We'll get back to the 100 facts about the Negro. Let's move on. Indiana Capital Chronicle, Native American Heritage Month, Indiana's history, and a season of gratitude. Tammy Silverman. Our state's name, Indiana, land of the Indians. And in this photo, let's read the caption. It says, Connor Prairie's 1816 Lenape Indian camp explores the life, culture, and relationship between the Lenape Indians and American fur traders. Lenape Indians and American fur traders. Wouldn't American fur traders also be Indians? It's a separation of the two. Bear with me. These things can be quite confusing. But the gentleman in the picture, I guess this gentleman is an Indian. He has on his not your normal costume, but he's supposed to be an Indian. Researcher Tara Kenjockety, part of the Seneca Nation and an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. Now think about that. A part of the Seneca Nation. Is she also enrolled in the Seneca Nation as she is enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation? Now, if these two nations are truly a part of her family bloodline, truly a part of her family, why would I have to enroll in my family? Or is enroll another name for born? I don't know. Of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin noted in her research for the ALA that Indiana was considered home to several different indigenous tribes, including the Miami, Wea, Piankashaw, Shawnee, Eel River, Delaware, and Potawatomi. Many additional indigenous tribes had a presence in Indiana at various points in history, including the Kickapoo, Odawa, Chippewa, Wyandot, Kaskaskia, Mohican, Nanticoke, Huron, and Mohegan. The Indiana Department of Natural Resources also provides an overview of the state's Native American history. They throw in Native American history. It, see how they're, when I say they're, the person who's writing the article is kind of Native American, American Indian, and are indigenous are all kind of synonymous with one another or interchangeable, which leads to confusion. Today, Native American Hoosiers are increasing in number, with about 26,000 individuals identifying as Native American in 2020 compared to 18,000 in 2010. So now we have about 26,000 in these places in Indiana and Chicago and Wisconsin, about 26,000 today that identify as Native American, the same as how we have now. We have boys identifying as girls and girls identifying as boys. The Indiana Native American Indian Affairs Commission and Government, Eric Holcomb, are highlighting the history, heritage, culture, and current affairs of Native American Indian residents through events across the state. Oxford English Dictionary, Seneca, collective name for the Upper Iroquois tribes or Upper Iroquois families, a member of an indigenous people originally inhabiting what is now upstate New York, one of the 5 nations comprising the original Iroquois Confederacy, their language, 1664. The Iroquois leader, Sagoyawatha, known as Red Jacket, was one of the Seneca tribe. Whoa. Red Seneca. Remember we just talked about that? My little story. Unbelievable. This is as of 1969. The Iroquois leader, Sagoyawatha, known as Red Jacket, was one of the Seneca tribe who fought alongside the British during the American War of Independence. Let's shake it. Oxford English Dictionary, Illinois, etymology, North American French, Mississippi Valley, 1670 or earlier. He speaks Illinois. He speaks the ordinary language. Illinois, the ordinary language. Mississippi Valley by the French. The Illinois Territory of the United States, the Illinois Territory of the United States, was formed in 1809, and its southern part, centering on the Illinois River, became the state of Illinois in 1818, in the name of the Illinois River after French Riviera des Illinois, River of the Illinois People, 1697. 1698, a member of a confederation of Algonquian peoples formerly inhabiting a large area of the Mississippi River Valley, including most of what is now the state of Illinois, 1698, taken to consideration. Language barriers. If someone is writing a story about a group of people, a large amount of people, they come into contact with certain people. They build their interpretations off of those people first and finally, in some cases. The people tell them certain things, they say certain things, and the interpreter interprets those things a certain way, and they write them a certain way within their capabilities. In 1896, Radisson does not mention in his journal the great and populous nation of the Illinois. This is 1896. He told us about DuSable, the Negro, who founded Chicago, 1779. 1933, the languages of the Great Lakes region, Illinois, Miami, and so on. 1895, the first stopping place the voyagers made appears to have been at the mouth of the Des Moines River, where they found the Illinois tribe. 1948, Starved Rock obtained its name from a legend which says that a band of Illinois Indians perished there in 1769. A legend, allegedly. 2007, Arkansas. Shout out to Arkansas. Some of my people from Arkansas was what the Illinois tribe called the Quapaw, downstream people. They spoke in terms of water. Oxford English Dictionary. Indian. Of, from, or belonging to any part of the Americas, from 1588. Of, from, or belonging to any part of the Americas, 1550 or earlier. Of, from, or belonging to any part of the Americas, 1495. You tell me. You tell me. I'm not trying to say this mean that or that mean this or I'm this or I'm that or you're that or you're this. Like a lot of people try to do. Talking about we from somewhere. Our people from this place. We from this global community. Speak for yourself. 1590, of, relating to, or characteristic of any of the indigenous people of North, Central, and South America, especially those of North America. We're talking about Indian here. 1832, the Indian tribes of Bolivia are generally of errant and warlike dispositions, particularly the Chiquitos. cousin named Chiquita. North American, made of corn or cornmeal, Indian corn, Indian bread, Indian pudding, 1608. If you listening, I know it's very easy to sit back and get comfortable inside of a tone, and lose what is actually being said. It's very simple. North American, made of corn, maize, or cornmeal, the stuff you use to bread your catfish with, the stuff you use to make dressing with. Indian corn, Indian bread, cornbread. Come on, who make the best cornbread? This is not a debate on who make the best cornbread. The cornbread is American. It's American. When you go somewhere, where do you go and get cornbread? The best cornbread first in your grandmama's house first. Indian pudding, grits. $19.89. Collard greens are another side dish with Indian dumplings. Hey, if there are any Native Americans in the watching the show, in the comment section, please let me know if they have this correct. If you guys, if collard greens are one of your side dishes, let me know. I'm curious. And I'm not being sarcastic. I don't care for sarcasm, really. 1794. From 1794, a copper color denotes the complexion of the Indians of Asia. A copper color. 1553, a member of the indigenous peoples of any part of the Americas. American Indian, Amerindian, in the 1970s. In the 1970s. Remember, from 1553, roughly, a member of the indigenous peoples of any part of the Americas, American Indian, Amerindian, in the 1970s, yesterday, the term Indian began to be replaced by Native American. And in the 1970s, your family, talking about I'm black and I'm proud, say it loud. 1926, the visitor to South America will see nothing more pitiful than the Indians of Peru and Bolivia, descendants of great civilizations. 1971, hey, you look like a real Indian with that headband. You know that? 1968, the majority of the people called Indians by the Spanish had an olive complexion. They not talking about the green olives. The Spanish didn't come here and see no green people. Okay? They did not see green people. Have you ever seen the olive? They got what they call the green olives and the black olives. Let's see. The majority of the people called Indians by the Spanish had a green complexion. The majority of the people called Indians by the Spanish had a blackish, purplish complexion. And then if you eat olives like I do, I like putting olives on pizza and whatnot. Get the black olives, and when you cut that olive, you see that it has a brown tint to it. 1769, an indigenous inhabitant of Australia, New Zealand, or the Pacific Islands. We're speaking of the word Indian from the Oxford English Dictionary. The section of it that calls money. The section of it you got the key in some numbers. 1872, the Aborigines, as they are now styled, Captain Cook would in his older time have called Indians. Captain Cook would have called them Indians. Any of the indigenous languages of the Americas. 1637. North American Indian corn. 1641. West Indian, 1555, a native or inhabitant of the West Indies, the islands. Indian fig, 1594, a prickly pear cactus. A prickly pear cactus, you know the kind you get at the little farmer's market, grocery store. It's called the Indian fig. Yeah, from the original, them people who you know, the Mexicans in Mexico and who don't get that much press, who you don't see on TV often. They call them Afro-Mexicans, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Mexicans. I'll call them indigenous. Indian bread, 1597, North American cornbread. Who eat cornbread? Period. Point blank. There's no discussion, no debate. Indian wood, 1604 to 1813, a dye produced from the deep red heartwood of any of several tropical American trees, especially logwood. Indian wood. Now, it doesn't, now listen, I have no problem. Me and Native Americans have no problems. Why would we? I don't know any. Never have. Just like I don't know any Africans. Never have. There are no problems. This is about me, my family, you, your family. Things should make sense. They do sometimes, and other times they don't. But this is making great sense. This is making sense to me. It says Indian wood. Doesn't say Native American wood. Indian wood. When people name these things, the truth is there. It's not hidden. It's there. Indian wood, 1604 to 1813, a dye produced from the deep red heartwood of any of several tropical American trees, especially logwood. This is natural dyes. Logwood. Logwood yields deep, rich red purples to orchid blues and has been prized as a dye stuff since the 16th century, the 1500s. The logwood tree grows in Mexico, Central America, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Brazil, the Guyanas, Madagascar, and India. When mixed with iron, logwood gives good blacks, a color difficult to achieve with natural dyes. Logwood, Indian wood. This is logwood. I know when they speak of red, when they make a comparison to red, I know everyone is thinking about like blood red, you know? It's just not the way it is. This is logwood. This is what they're speaking of. Indian wood. Let's get back to Indian in the Oxford English Dictionary online, the online version. American Indian, 1650, a member of one of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, especially one of the peoples inhabiting land in what is now the continental United States. Indian blue, 1664. Indian blue, 1664. The deep violet blue color of the dye indigo. Here we go, 1666. Engine, colloquial, chiefly U.S., a North American indigenous person. Indian peach, 1709, any of several varieties of peach tree naturalized in North America, formerly thought to be indigenous, especially one bearing fruit having deep red flesh. Peaches, Georgia peaches. Indian pudding or grits, 1722, a dish consisting of cornmeal boiled in water or milk, usually eaten with breakfast. I don't do no milk. The water's enough. Might put a little bit of whatever in there. If you going to a restaurant, they might put a little milk or a little cream, but generally it's just water. And stir it up, water, and stir it. And they say usually eating with breakfast. Whatever. Eat it any time of the day. Bloody Indian, 1758. Bloody Indian, 1758. Tribes, families, mobs, gangs, Bloody Indian, 1758. A member of the Blood or Kenai people, one of the four groups making up the Blackfoot Confederacy. Blood Indian. 1799, Copper Indian, an indigenous person of North America. Red Indian. Indian rice, 1809, any of several kinds of North American wild rice. Any of several kinds of North American wild rice. It didn't say nothing about no rice being brought here from anywhere else. Indian rice, any of several kinds of North American wild rice, no matter if it's from Montana or South Carolina. 1809. Treaty Indian, 1876, an indigenous person in North America whose people have signed a treaty with the government. Amerindian, 1899, of or relating to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Let's go back to 100 things about the Negro, 100 facts about the Negro and such. Okay. Here we have John VI, King of Portugal, a dark mulatto, was the maker of modern Brazil. Transferring his throne to Rio de Janeiro in 1808, he ruled Portugal from Brazil. This is the first and only time a European country has been ruled by an American one. Pedro I, colored son of John VI, became first emperor of Brazil in 1822. Pedro I married the sister of Napoleon's second wife, Gloria Pedro's daughter, became Queen of Portugal, and was a sister-in-law of Victoria, Queen of England. Many members of European royalty trace their ancestry to the Negro ruler, John VI. John Baptiste Bernadotte, a colored man, was the founder of the present royal family of Sweden. Enlisting as a private in Napoleon's army, he rose to be field marshal. In 1818, he ascended to the throne of Sweden as Charles XIV. The word slave was originally applied to white people. It comes from Slav, a Russian people captured by the Germans. The first slaves held in the United States were not black. The first slaves held in the United States were not black, but white. They were Europeans, mostly British, who died like flies on the slave ships across. On one voyage, 1,100 perished out of 1,500. At another time, 350 out of 400. In Virginia, white servitude was for a limited period, but was sometimes extended to life. In the West Indies, particularly in the case of the Irish, it was for life. White people were sold in the United States up to 1826, 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, was a runaway and was advertised for in the newspapers. Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, was a runaway and was advertised for in the newspapers. Andrew Johnson ran away. Somebody catch his ass. Get his ass. In 1670, Virginia passed a law forbidding Negroes from buying white people. In 1670, Virginia passed a law forbidding Negroes from buying white people. This was 51 years after the Negro had arrived in chains. The same law was repeated in 1748. Free Negroes bought white people in such numbers in Louisiana that the state made a similar law in 1818. What are we talking about here? I know. The transatlantic slave slave story is near and dear to your heart. Near and dear to your heart. White children were kidnapped in the British Isles at the rate of several thousands yearly in the 17th and 16th century and sold into slavery in America and the West Indies. If you want to know about yesterday, look at today. Trafficking, immigration, illegal immigration. No racism. Miserable people and blissful people. And the miserable people want everyone to be miserable like them. And the miserable people want you to be miserable. And like them, go to your grave miserable. White children were kidnapped in the British Isles at the rate of several thousands yearly in the 17th and 18th century and sold into slavery in America and the West Indies. Sometimes they were bootlegged and sold as Negroes. I am ignorant on this subject. I am ignorant on this subject of black Europeans, so-called black Europeans, Negro Europeans. I learned about this from Big Chief Legendary Top Cats, from legendary Big Chief Top Cats. Who's done extensive lectures on this very subject. I know. I know. You thought all Negroes came from sub-Saharan Africa, including you. You placed all your ancestors in sub-Saharan Africa and said you was a descendant of an upright monkey. Ain't nothing wrong with monkeys, but they say you was a descendant of an upright monkey. And you say it too. White children were kidnapped in the British Isles at a rate of several thousand years. White children were kidnapped in the British Isles at the rate of several thousands yearly in the 17th and 18th century and sold into slavery in America and the West Indies. Sometimes they were bootlegged and sold as Negroes. How could they be bootlegged and sold as Negroes? Unless they could pass for a Negro. White Americans, North and South, were also kidnapped or seduced and sold as Negroes as late as 1859. One of the most celebrated cases of a white person sold as a Negro was Sally Muller, who was held in servitude in Louisiana for 26 years. Court after court ruled against her. Finally, her birth certificate was dug up in Germany, and she was freed by the Supreme Court in 1818. In 1860, there were 487,000 free Negroes in the United States, some of whom owned slaves. C.D. Wilson estimates that there were 6,230 Negro slave holders. The tax returns of Charleston, South Carolina, for 1860 showed 132 Negro slave holders with 390 slaves, 132 Negro bosses, Negro employers with 390 employees, with 390 laborers, 390 workers. The Negro slave holders, the Negro managers, the Negro employers, like the white ones, fought to keep their chattels in the Civil War, fought to keep their employees in the Civil War. Jean Francois, leader of the Haitian blacks in 1791, an ex-slave, and once superior officer of Toussaint L'Ouverture, rose to be a grandee of Spain. This gave him the privilege of calling the King of Spain cousin. What up, cuz? Calling the King of Spain cuz, and wearing his hat in the royal presence. He was a favorite at the court of Madrid. Napoleon had 12 West Indian Negro generals. One of the most daring leaders of the Filipinos against the American troops in the Philippines in 1899 was an American Negro deserter named Fagin. The United States has had 7 big wars, exclusive of Indian ones. The Negro has distinguished himself in all of them. In the last war, France awarded the Croix de Guerre to 4 whole Negro regiments, the 369th, the 370th, the 371st, and 372nd, as well as the 1st Battalion of the 367th. 60 Negro officers and 359 commissioned officers and men were decorated for valor. 41 Negroes have received the Congressional Medal of Honor for bravery. In the American Civil War, the Negro played a role similar to that of America in the last World War. That is, both provided a balance of power that brought victory to one side. Without the aid of the Negro, or properly the American, there might have been no United States now. You see? The American is always involved. Your people, your family, the people who you come from, Your ancestors were always involved in this United States occupation. There is no way anything can happen here in America without your help, without your energy, without the aid of the Negro, without the aid of the American, without the aid of the indigenous person. There might have been no United States now. Abraham Lincoln said 4 times that without the Negro, it would be impossible for the North to win. This statement is all the more striking since Lincoln, in response to popular prejudice, steadfastly refused at first to employ Negro troops, though the South was doing so. Instead, he wanted to ship the Negroes away. He wanted to ship the Negroes away. And in 1862, had Congress to vote $600,000 to send the first installment to the Isle de Vache in Haiti. The colony ended in disastrous failure, and Lincoln sent a ship for the surviving Negro deportees. Yeah, because the indigenous Haitian people, the indigenous Haitians, the Americans from the islands, the Haitians, the indigenous Haitians wasn't having no Americans from the mainland coming over there colonizing. Kind of reminds you of the Americans who now push for you to go back home to Mommy Africa. And Mommy Africa, some of the people from Mommy Africa say, come on home. Y'all, come on home. We've been waiting for y'all. Tony Simpson, a humble Louisiana Negro, an American, posing as Prince Antonio Apache of Arizona, became the social lion of the elite of New York and Philadelphia in 1903. Among those who feted him in their drawing rooms or in the Golden Horseshoe at the Metropolitan Opera were Mrs. John Jacob Astor, Mrs. Howard Gould, and Mrs. John R. Drexel. Even President Theodore Roosevelt was taken in the who's who. The latter consulted Prince Apache several times on Indian affairs at the White House. The prince was tall and imposing, dressed like a Beau Brummel, and had the manners of a Chesterfield. He has the manner of a Chesterfield. He used to wear a wig attached to a tuft of his own woolly hair. A tuft of his own woolly hair. An American Negro has 20 chances to a white American's one of reaching 100 years or over. Since 1460 AD or earlier, the Negroes of Seville, Spain, had been wearing in the religious procession on the feast of Corpus Christi a white robe and hood, strikingly like that used by the Ku Klux Klan, which originated 428 years later. Yeah. Since 1460 AD or earlier, the Negroes of Seville, Spain, since 1460 AD or earlier, the Negroes of Seville, Spain, had been wearing in the religious procession on the feast of Corpus Christi a white robe and hood, strikingly like that used by the Ku Klux Klan, which originated 428 years later. The Afro-Americans group has a greater percentage of women than men. In 1930, there were 1,027 white men for every 1,000 white women, and only 970 Negro men for every 1,000 colored women. See how they do that? 970 Negro men for every 1,000 colored women. See the names? Negro, colored, interchangeable, confusion. I'm confused right now. The 1930 census says, differing from all other races, the Negroes have shown an excess of females at every census since and including that of 1840. The relative excess of females in 1930 was greater than that shown at any previous census except that of 1870. The Indian population has shown an excess of males. Volume 2, page 94. The effect of this is far-reaching and significant, since the birth rate of a population is determined not by the percentage of males, but of the females. The Negro group is assured of a greater proportionate increase than any of the white groups, the more so as white immigration has been greatly reduced. Let that sink in. Minority. Let it sink in, you minority. Question mark. Another deduction is that despite popular belief, the Negro women are not less moral than the white ones as a group. For instance, European women are more chaste than American ones, not because of any inherent quality, but because there are less men to pursue them. In 1836, the Negro wife of Osceola, a Seminole chief, was seized as a slave. In 1836, the Negro wife of Osceola, a Seminole chief of Indian Negro descent, was seized as a slave. Indian Negro descent. Confusion. They could have just said it would have been the same confusion, but what it says here is Indian black, black Indian, American. Anytime I've seen any illustration of Osceola, it was also always a pink or gray person. You feel me? Always somebody pink or gray, somebody who you term white, whitewashed. We see this may not be true. In 1836, the Negro wife of Osceola, a Seminole chief of Indian Negro descent, try to tell you that the Seminoles are runaway Africans. Up until this point that I've been reading, up until this point of this show, I'm not sure I even heard the word African. But yet you were told that the Seminoles were runaway Africans. There's always Africans with these people. You know, they're always talking about people coming over here mating with the indigenous population. Like when you was a shorty, if you had a group of people who came from another landmass coming to your neighborhood, they just gonna start mating with your family. The people around you just for some reason just gonna start mating with these people. Osceola, in revenge, ambushed, killed, and scalped U.S. General Thompson and 3 other white men. Thus began the Second Seminole War. Osceola says J.R. Giddings visited Fort King in company with his wife and a few friends for the purpose of trading. Mr. Thompson, the agent, was present, and while engaged in business, the wife of Osceola was seized as a slave. evidently having Negro blood in her veins. Negro blood in her veins. I thought blood was blue, and then when it hit the oxygen, when it hit the air, it turned red. Negro is they make it synonymous with black. So who has black blood? But then again, when you have red blood and the blood come out and it get hard and turn hard, it looks black. Red, red man, black, Negro. This is a puzzle. Let's shake it. Evidently, Osceola's wife, having Negro blood in her veins, the law pronounced her a slave. And as no other person could show title to her, the pirate who had got possession of her body was supposed, of course, to be her owner. Osceola became frantic with rage. From that moment, when this outrage was committed, the Florida War may be regarded as commenced. On May 9th, 1862, General Hunter of the Union Army issued a proclamation freeing the slaves of Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina, which Lincoln annulled. Lincoln said, General Hunter is an honest man. He proclaimed all men free within certain states. I repudiated the proclamation. This is from the Complete Works of Abraham Lincoln, Volume 2, page 155, 205, New York, 1920. Hannibal Hamilton, Civil War Vice President, native of Maine. Native of Maine was strongly objected to by the South and its sympathizers, who declared he was a Negro. Once when attacked on the floor of Congress because of this, he retorted, I take my complexion from nature. He gets his from the brandy bottle. So he said that punk was tapped. He said he was drunk. Hannibal Hamlin, Civil War Vice President, native of Maine, was strongly objected to by the South and its sympathizers, who declared he was a Negro. Once when attacked on the floor of Congress because of this, he retorted, I take my complexion from nature. He gets his from the brandy bottle. Which is more honorable? C.M. Hamlin, Hannibal Hamlin, page 56, 354 to 56, Cambridge, 1899, and other sources. Professor E. Pittard of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, gives abundant support to Verneau in Les Races et l'Histoire, page 81 through 86, Paris, 1924. Histoire Universelle speaks of Austria being inhabited by Negroes in the Paleolithic age. Frederick Hertz, German anthropologist in Race and Civilizations, refers twice to Beethoven's Negroid traits and his dark-skinned and flat, thick nose. Now you talking about my man, you riding him. Frau Fischer, an intimate acquaintance of Beethoven, describes him thus. Short, stocky, broad shoulders, short neck, round nose, blackish brown complexion. This is Beethoven we're talking about here. You say a nigga don't got no class? Referring to the above incident, Alexander W. Thayer, perhaps the foremost authority on Beethoven, says Beethoven had even more of the Moor in his features than his master. And then it says by Moor was meant Negro. Until recent times, the German for Negro was more. Louvre show, whatever the Aryans might have been at first, they were later, say about 1100 BC, very much mixed with the Negroes, not only in Mesopotamia, but in India. The term India, Aryans. Sheesh. Louvre show, whatever the Aryans might have been at first, they were later, say about 1100 BC, very much mixed with the Negroes, not only in Mesopotamia, but in India. The term Aryan, when used as a symbol of race purity by Hitler and others, is the kind of idiocy that lunatics tongue and brain not. Interesting. On the presence of the Negro in America before Columbus, C.C. Marquez says, the Negro type is seen in the most ancient Mexican sculpture. The Negroes figure frequently in the most remote traditions of some American pueblos. It is to this race doubtlessly belongs the most ancient skeletons of very distinct structure of two of the red American races, which have been found in various places from Bolivia to Mexico. Dixon emphasizes the fact that there was an early Negro strain in the Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Central American Indians. Columbus says he wanted to find out what the Indians had told him, that there had come to it from the South and Southeast Negro peoples. Peter Martyr, the amanuensis of Columbus, tells of Negroes living in Central America before the introduction of slavery and says these were the first Negroes seen in the Indies. Professor Leo Weiner of Harvard University says the presence of Negroes with their trading masters before Columbus is proved by the representation of Negroes in American sculpture and design, by the occurrence of a black nation at Darien, the Darien Gap, where all them people being delivered to, coming from, being charged debt, sent off to the border and whatnot at Darien early in the 16th century, but more specifically by Columbus's emphatic reference to Negro traders from Guinea. The chief cultural influence was exerted by a Negro colony in Mexico, now y'all call Afro-Mexicans. Colonel A. Breguin says that he saw in Ecuador a statuette of a Negro that is at least 20,000 years old. He adds, hitherto, the ethnologists imagined that Negroes appeared in the New World only during our own epoch, when they were imported as slaves. Some statues of the Indian gods in Central America possess typical Negro features, and certain prehistoric monuments were undoubtedly represent Negroes. V. Riva Palacio says, it is indisputable that in very ancient times the Negro race occupied our territory, Mexico, when the two continents were joined. My God. This race brought its own religious cults and ideals when the two continents were joined. I guess this is Pangea. Vomit. Ugh. Pangea. People speaking of millions of years ago and such, Calhoun says a considerable proportion of Jefferson's slaves were his own children. Of course, because at that particular time on the census, or at that particular time, if you were the head of the household, everyone else was your slave. And this is patriarchy at its finest. Calhoun says a considerable proportion, and understand that this wasn't necessarily the language of families at that time. This is our interpretation of that. This is when politics got involved or became involved. This is where now people are being indoctrinated with this idea of patriarchy, man as the head of the house, rules with an iron fist, the woman is submissive, lowly, da 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 da, blah blah blah. Calhoun says a considerable proportion of Jefferson's slaves were his own children. If any of them made off, he would smile, as if to imply that he would not be urgent in pursuit. He bequeathed freedom to 5 of his children, and the assembly passed a law allowing them to remain in the state. Jefferson's favorite concubine was the famous Black Sow. The following are 2 lines from the Jeffersoniad, written about both of them. Here it goes. Or seek in dark and dirty alley a Mr. Jefferson's Miss Sally. Jefferson had Black Sal to take his white daughter to France. H.W. Pearson, Jefferson at Monticello. At Jefferson's deathbed was an almost white Negro girl, believed to be his daughter, but which the writer says belonged to another man evidently noted because he leaves the name blank. At Jefferson's deathbed was an almost white Negro girl. Light-skinned sister, American. The Century Dictionary says originally one of the Slavs or Slavonians taken in war. Slav originally meant the people of glory. For the transportation of white slaves to America and their sale, see James O'Neill, The Workers in American History, chapter, The White Slave Trade. He quotes one ship sailing in 1745 with 400 Germans, of whom only 50 lived to see free America. Still another bearing 1,500 lost 1,100 from deaths on the voyage. Pastor Kuntz, writing at that time, said, packed like herring and sold as slaves. J.B. McMaster, noted historian, says of the white slaves, the newcomer became in the eyes of the law a slave, and in both the civil and the criminal code was classed with the Negro slaves and Indians. They were worked hard, were dressed in the cast-off clothes of their owners, and might be flogged as often as the master or mistress thought necessary. In other words, the exploiters were no respecters of color or race. First American soldiers of any race, white or black, to receive the French Croix de Guerre were Henry Johnson of Albany, New York, and Needham Roberts of Trenton, New Jersey. Scott, the American Negro in the World War. Black and colored have no historic meaning whatever for African peoples. Black and colored have no historic meaning whatever for African peoples. The various U.S. Census reports consistently show that Afro Americans are longer lived than white Americans. Afro Americans, not sure what that means. Negro Americans, Black Americans, Negroes, Blacks, dark skinned people are longer lived than white Americans. Speaking of the parade of the Negro Brotherhood in Seville, Spain, or as you might put it, Seville, Spain. Speaking of the parade of the Negro Brotherhood in Seville, Spain, in 1926, Arthur Schomburg, curator of the Carnegie Library, West 135th Street, New York City, says it was only human to wish to examine the garments of the Brotherhood of the Negroes after observing the similarity to the white robes and cowls used by the Ku Klux Klan of our country. To all appearances, the American organization copied the dress of those believers in Christ. Now, why would those good old boys copy the Negro Brotherhood's garments in Seville, Spain? Why would those haters of Negroes do that? Why would those good old boys do that? It was only human to wish to examine the garments of the Brotherhood of the Negroes after observing the similarity to the white robes and cowls used by the Ku Klux Klan of our country. To all appearances, the American organization copied the dress of those believers in Christ. Not even in garments, it seems, is the American order original. They are evidently copied faithfully from a very sacred brotherhood whose devotion won them the love and gratitude of the Spanish people, from king to peasant, pontiff to believer. This is from Opportunity MAGA, page 164, June 1927, New York. Today, the descendants of these Spanish Negroes are quite bleached from mixing with their white neighbors. But the old, are they? Remember the mating. Everybody just accepts groups of people to come start mating with them. Quite bleached from mixing with their white neighbors. Not saying that some of them did, but the old Negro tradition remains. The Negro Church of Nuestra Senora de Los Angeles in the Barrio Carmona is still maintained by them. Priests, guides, and others in Seville informed me that the garb is exactly like that of centuries ago. For earlier information on these negritos, as they are called in Seville, see Zuniga's Annals de Sevilla, published in Madrid in 1677. Later, the Negroes rose to a position of prominence and had a count, after whom one of the streets is still named. If the originators of the Ku Klux Klan did not copy the garb of these Negroes, then the coincidence is really amazing. Picture below is Parade of Seville Negro Order. Here they are. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's shake it. Charlotte Sophia, Queen of England, consort of George III, great great grandmother of George VI. Charlotte Sophia, Queen of England, consort of George III, great great grandmother of George VI. The New York Times, Monday, July 1st, 1940. Negroid blood in Hitler's Aryans. Africans and Native Americans. Jack D. Forbes. In 1562, one Maria de Vilhena liberated by her testament 2 Indians, a white, a brown, a black, a mulatto, 2 Moors, a man and a woman, a Chino as a male, and 2 other captives. 2 other captives, where the race was apparently unknown. About the year 1550, the King of Portugal declared that in order to avoid disputes as to who could get water from the river at certain places for the purpose of selling water in Lisbon. Thus, sections along the river were set aside for various groups, Americans being included in the group with black and mulatto males or black and mulatto females, slave and free, rather than with Muslims. We can then picture the interaction of these various kinds of persons trying to earn money by peddling water through the streets of Lisbon. Peddling water. By 1496, to provide mutual assistance and communal life for pretos, blacks, this group petitioned in the interest of the community as, for example, in efforts to keep officials seeking runaway slaves from breaking into homes of negras and pretas, dark-skinned women, who were honest women, married to linguas, interpreters, and meriantes, seamen. Many American slaves were resold from Portugal to other countries, and this trade continued for at least a century. In 1592, for example, a widower of Lisbon sold Beatrice, age 12, originally from Pernambuco, Brazil, to the Canary Islands. Child trafficking. Remember, we're in Lisbon, talking about Americans. We are talking about Americans in Spain, in Lisbon, and in Portugal. We're talking about a widower of Lisbon sold Beatrice, a 12-year-old girl, originally from Brazil, to the Canary Islands. Many Americans were sold as slaves in Spain, as revealed by the notarial records of Seville and Valencia. Look it up for yourself. Look it up for yourself. Yeah. Many slaves are classified only as to their color, and for some, even that is lacking. The color terms used, such as loro, intermediate, negro, black or very dark, blanco, light, loro casi negro, brown, almost black, and so on, are not diagnostic as to race, because they refer to color as perceived by the authorities and not to ancestry. It is especially helpful when the place of birth is given, but otherwise it is not possible to tell whether a given loro, for example, is from the Americas, from the Canary Islands, from Northern Africa, from India, or from Spain itself. Right? Right. About 102 laurels were registered in Seville between 1472 and 1513. And 10% of those identified were from the Americas. It is during this time period, it is during this same period of time, Americans in the Caribbean were being referred to as Lauros. The term Negro is, of course, very commonly used for Seville slaves. Often the individual so categorized can be linked with a particular region or kingdom in Africa. Others, however, are not so identified and could be, in some cases, Americans of darker color. Sometimes non-Christian personal names suggest such an origin, as with Pidiwan, a Negro soul in 1500. Those Americans recorded as specifically being from Americas are as follows: Pastora, age 13-14, Francisca, age 11-12, Pedro, 12, Cosme, 12, Gonzalo, 10, Rodrigo, 13, Maria, 8. Child trafficking at its finest. In addition, 4 other Americans were registered in 1500, 1503, and 1506. These people keep records. Look for the records. Don't be lazy. Between 1513 and 1525, another 21 Americans were registered in Seville, in Spain. American Indian people, whether of unmixed ancestry or mixed with other stocks, were at times affected by the tendency to create a purely white-black social system, especially when living away from a reservation or the tribal homeland. In the British slave colonies of North America along the Atlantic coast, many persons of American ancestry were at times classified as blacks, Negroes, mulattoes, or people of color. The purpose here is to illustrate how the term Negro has also been applied to people of American descent to this day. The late medieval period in Italy and the Iberian Peninsula saw people being variously classified as Albo, Abi, Blanco, Branco, white, Nero, Nigri, Negro, Negre, Preto, black, and as of intermediate colors. It is apparent from the evidence that the term Negro or its equivalent was not used for a race or for a single stock of people or to point to ancestry or ethnicity. It was usually a simple description for perceived color or appearance. It is quite clear that a perception of color is being described and not ancestry. Thus, in the late, it is quite clear that a perception of color is being described and not ancestry. And anyone, the black bliggity black crowd, the black bliggity black machine is not your friend. Maybe your friend, and is very unkind to you. Thus, in the late medieval and early modern period, there is no equivalent to the recent North American tendency to utilize the term Negro or black for persons of alleged Negro or black ancestry. People were usually described as black, olive, brown, red, copper, or whatever, according to their skin or hair color only, not according to a racial scheme. On the other hand, there was a tendency to also utilize the term Negro or its functional equivalent, more German, Dutch, French, in a very broad sense. Albrecht Dürer, for example, although certainly aware of the existence of Americans, is recorded as stating that there were only two types of human beings, white and black. The Portuguese, as we shall see, also tended to use the term Negro to encompass many non-African people whose skin color was a shade of brown. We can say that by Negro an equivalence is meant a range of color shades. For humans generally dark browns, always less extreme than true black, but approaching the darkness of black, and also including very often people of medium shades of brown. The issues involved in the perception of brown and other shades of color immediate between black and white will be discussed early in the next chapter. Here, we will proceed to illustrate how terms meaning black have been utilized for people whose skin colors are often of various lighter shades. Latin niger, negri, would seem to be the predecessor of Spanish and Portuguese negro, Catalan negri, Italian nero, French noir, and negri, black or dark person. These terms correspond to Dutch zwart, zwart, German schwarz, English black. Swarthy has come to be equivalent to dark rather than black. As applied to humans, these terms do not necessarily imply a true black color, but merely a range of dark shades approaching black or reminding one of black. Thus, there is a considerable range for interpretation. An early Spanish-French dictionary, 1607, translated Spanish negro as being equivalent to French noir, sombre, obscure, offusque, brun. Negro de la Guinea is equivalent to un negre, un more, or more. As will be noted in the case of Dutch, the above allows for dark and brun to be subsumed under Negro and uses French more as equivalent to a negro or Negro from Guinea. The term Moor and its equivalents were widely used in late medieval and early modern Europe. According to Simonet, in his study of the language spoken by the Christian Spaniards under Muslim rule before 1492, Moro meant Negro and corresponded to Castilian usage in which Moro was applied to horses whose color was negro. The corresponding Moor, Morus, and Moro were derived from Latin morus, negro, and ultimately from a Greek word meaning oscuro. Similarly, Mozarabic, Moro was related to Moro, Spanish and Italian, Moro, Portuguese, and Gallego, Moor, Provencal, Mori, and Moor, French, meaning Moro, Negro, hombre, they color. These forms stemmed from Latin morus, also from Greek, for the dark color of the Mauritanos or Moros, people of Northwest Africa. In 1591, an Italian went to Cabo Verdes, a comprad mori per India Occidentally, that is, to buy African slaves, mori, for the Americas in 1591. To summarize, the people of northwestern Africa, Algeria and Morocco, were anciently known as Mori or Mauritanians, and this name in both Greek in 1591. In 1591, an Italian went to Cabo Verdes, a comprar mori per India occidentally, that is, to buy African slaves Maori for the Americas. To summarize, the people of northwestern Africa, Algeria, Morocco, were anciently known as Maori or Mauritanians. It should be noted that during the 16th and 17th century, slaves were constantly running away while others were given their freedom. The free people of color could be arrested as fugitives from slavery, and if they did not possess a document proving their right to liberty, they could be jailed and sold. In 1589, Melchior Diaz, a man de color de membrillo cocido scuro, or darkish, was arrested. Diaz stated that his father and mother were both free people and that neither they nor any predecessors had been captives or slaves, but for being the color he is, it was presumed or pretended that he was a slave. Thus, a dark skin color was definitely a disadvantage in Spain when away from friends or neighbors. We're talking about Spain here. In 1579, as noted earlier, Bartolome Sanchez was captured as a suspected fugitive. He stated that his father was Blanche, and that his mother was a negra de las Indies de Portugal. She had been a slave, but Sanchez claimed that he himself was free. In spite of being half white and probably half American, he was termed a black man. The general use of the term negro in Spain can also be seen in the instance in 1607 when the Annals of Seville record that empezó a verse el tabaco, tomabando el humo, algunos negros bozales, the new unassimilated Negros who introduced smoking tobacco to Seville must have been Americans. In 1607, the new unassimilated Negroes who introduced smoking tobacco to Seville must have been Americans. Some niggers brought some Newports with them and offered them a square. In the early 1560s, a Spanish official wrote to the king that in the island of Puerto Rico, there are above 15,000 Negroes and less than 500 Spaniards. And in all of the island of Hispaniola, there may be 2,000 Spaniards and there are over 30,000 Negroes. The same is the case in the island of Cuba and in Veracruz. Puerto de Caballos, which is in Honduras, and in Nombre de Dios, Cartagena, Santa Maria, and the coast of Venezuela, where there are 20 Negroes to one white man. It seems certain that the official was using white and black in the sense of us and them, that is, those who could be counted on to support Spanish control and those who, because of their status, might aid an enemy. He states specifically that the French could capture Santo Domingo with 500 soldiers, and by freeing the Negroes, most of whom are Latinos and natives of the land, and by liberating them so that they be no longer slaves, they would kill their own masters. Now, how could Africans have been natives of the land at such an early date? This is what he asked. Not me. I don't have an answer for him. It seems highly likely that the Spaniards referred to slaves generally as Negroes in the Caribbean, partly because the term became the equivalent of slave, but also because such usage allowed them to continue to illegally enslave Americans without revealing that fact to the authorities of Spain. It is clear that many Spaniards were extremely reluctant to abandon the enslavement of Americans after 1542. The Dutch may very well have taken up a similar usage, especially since negro and neger were not originally Dutch words and had no immediate equivalent except Moor. The Dutch may very well have taken up a similar usage, especially since negro and neger were not originally Dutch words and had no immediate equivalent except Moor. Thus, Spanish negro could be translated as dark or brown, as well as black, in the view of a Spaniard residing in Antwerp in the early 17th century, the presumed preparer of the dictionary. This ambiguity undoubtedly facilitated making reference to all slaves as negro and neger in the Dutch language, regardless of precise color, and could have implications for earlier usage in Virginia, 1619 to 1620, 1619 to 1620, the 1619 project to 1620. What's really happening in 1619? You remember what we just went over, right? Regardless of precise color, and could have implications for earlier usage in Virginia, 1619 to 1620, when neggers were purchased from the Dutch. Neggers were purchased from the Dutch. They gave you some gizame. They gave you some game right there. Neggers were purchased from the Dutch, 20 and odd Africans, 20 and odd Negroes, 20 and odd Negras, 20 and odd Neggers. Dutch warship and whatnot. Yeah. It should be noted that for a very long period, the Dutch language used Moor and Morion for black Africans and not Negro or Neger. By 1844, 1845, Dutch dictionaries have shifted the meaning of Moor to a North African. Zwart, meaning black, as can be seen, was not used as a proper racial name in Dutch, and its application was not restricted to Africans. There is, for example, an early reference to de Zwart Indianen, the black Indians, in Sumatra by a Dutch traveler, in addition to the example cited above. A dictionary of 1728 also translate American Indian from French Indienne to Dutch Zwarten. Thus both Moor and Zwart were applied to East Indian Indonesians and, on occasion, to Americans, as noted. Over the years, Negro and black both became synonymous with enslavement. In 1702, an observer wrote that the wealth of Virginia consisted in slaves or Negroes. In 1819, South Carolina judges stated flatly the word Negroes has a fixed meaning, slaves. What the English meant by the term Negro when they first began to use it is not clear. Certainly, it was not then synonymous with slave, as a great many persons so classified were free, both in England and in Virginia. Did it mean an African, a black person, or any dark-skinned individual? Today, the term is not widely employed in Britain, although the word black is used to refer to people of various skin colors from all of South Asia, the Middle East, the West Indies, and Africa. Most unmixed American Indians, if living in Britain today, would be regarded as being black, especially if their ancestry were not known. Several illustrations can be cited to show that not only Africans, but also Americans and Asians were called black or Negro in Britain itself in the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1688, the London Gazette carried an advertisement for a black boy, an Indian, about 13 years old, runaway the eighth institute something from Putney, with a collar about his neck, with this inscription: "The Lady Bromfield's black." More child trafficking. More child trafficking. This didn't just begin. More child slavery. These are some disgusting people. In 1688, the London Gazette, 1688, the London Gazette carried an advertisement for a black boy, an Indian, about 13 years old, runaway from Putney, with a collar about his neck, with the inscription, "The Lady Bromfield's black." In 1709, the Tatler carried an advertisement for a black Indian boy, 12 years of age. Similar usage of language is also found in the play Mangora, written by Thomas More in 1718, in a scene taking place in Paraguay. An American warrior chant to an American woman, "Black beauty, come on. I must love thee or none. You see my face black." A student of the history of black people in Britain has written that it should be borne in mind that the word Negro in this period, the 1600s, could mean an Asian as well as an African or other person of African descent. Sometimes a performer in pageants is identified as one or the other, or the costume provides a clue, though black performers were often required to personate American Indians. Sheesh. It's a lot, I know. I know y'all, I know you watching. You like, yikes. A student of history of black people in Britain has written that it should be borne in mind that the word Negro in this period, the 1600s, could mean an Asian as well as an African. Sometimes a performer in pageants is identified as one or the other, or the costume provides a clue, though black performers were often required to personate American Indians. In March 1765, English newspapers carried stories about a Native American preacher discovered and helped by the Reverend George Whitfield. This preacher was the famous Samson Occom, a Mohegan from New England. The newspapers referred to him as a black who could speak English very well and who had preached to crowded audiences. Occom sailed to England that year. An American did not have to go to England to be called black. However, in Connecticut in 1711, a family of Indian servants consisting in one Rachel and her 7 children were distributed by will and were called blacks. Illustrate the use of Negro and Black in English as applied to people of American ancestry. 1764, William Young. Living on St. Vincent were about 3,000 black Caribs or free Negroes. The latter were eventually defeated and some 5,000 were shipped to an island near the coast of Honduras. Young, hold on. Okay, here we go. In 1619, some 20 Negros were brought to Virginia. At least 11 had names of Spanish or probable Spanish character. Later, they were joined by Negroes and mulattoes with names such as Antonio and John Pedro. The Spanish-derived servants could well have been of part American ancestry. However, no evidence is available except that they were largely secured from captured Spanish vessels. In 1676, one Gowan, an Indian servant, acquired his freedom in Virginia. 2 decades earlier, Mahill Gowan, called a Negro, also acquired his freedom. It would appear that the Negro was probably father to the Indian in this case. In 1670, the population of Virginia colony was said to be 40,000, including 2,000 black slaves. Evidence indicates that there could not have been that many Africans there, and also that there were a great many American slaves or servants. Thus, the total of blacks must have included a good many Americans. In 1698, 3 fugitive Negroes were reported in North Carolina, whom one was an American. Similarly, a list of Negroes imported into Virginia 1710 to 1718 by sea includes at least 69 Indians, mostly from the Carolinas. Likewise, lists of Negroes brought into New York from 1715 to 1736 include many slaves of probable or stated American ancestry from Campeche, Jamaica, Honduras, the Carolinas, and Virginia. In the 1715 to 1717 period, the Vestry Book of King William Parish, Virginia, records 1 year Robin, Indian, and 2 years later, Robin, Negro. In the 1715 to 1717 period, the Vestry Book of King William Parish, Virginia, records 1 year Robin, Indian, and 2 years later, Robin, Negro. In a similar manner, a 1691 list of Negro slaves in York County, Virginia includes Kate, Indian, while a 1728 list of Negroes at the home house of a Virginia planter includes Indian Robin. Robin, incidentally, is a common name for slaves of American ancestry. In 1748, there was an advertisement in New York for a Negro man servant called Robin, almost of the complexion of an Indian, talks good English, can read and write, and plays on the fiddle. He plays on the fiddle. He the complexion of an Indian, whatever that means. Talks good English, can read and write, and plays on the fiddle. In 1723, Virginia adopted a law depriving free Negroes, mulattoes, and Indians of certain basic civil rights. Here we have one. Runaway on the 20th of September last from Kohansi, a very lusty Negro fellow named Samson, aged about 53 years and had some Indian blood in him. He had with him a boy about 12 or 13 years of age named Sam, was born of an Indian woman and looks like an Indian, only his hair. They both talk Indian very well, and it is likely they have dressed themselves in the Indian dress and gone to Carolina. 1778 advertisement we read says was stolen from her mother, a Negro girl about 9 or 10 years of age named Diana. Her mother's name is Cash. Was married to an Indian named Lewis Wallace. Near 6 feet high, about 35 years of age. They have a male child with them between 3 and 4 years old. Any person who takes up the said Negroes and Indian shall have the above reward. Quite clearly, persons having American ancestry or the appearance of it could be called Negroes in Virginia. In 1774, one Robert Chavers, a fiddler, ran away from the South Branch of the Meherrin River in Mecklenburg County. He was called a Negro man, but the Shavers name is common among Lumbee and other Native American groups in nearby North Carolina. In 1773, Tom, a Negro man of a yellowish complexion, much the appearance of an Indian, ran away. Of a yellowish complexion, much the appearance of an Indian. So in this advertisement, a yellow bone, what we call a yellow bone, they consider as the appearance of an Indian. So this kind of confirms the light skin thing. The light skinned as opposed to dark or brown or caramel or brown. His hair is of a different kind from that of a Negro's. Because, you know, all of us got the same kind of hair. Rather more of the Indians. In 1777, John Twopence, a Negro man, ran away in Essex County from the Blandfield estate of Robert Beverly. Twopence was of a yellowish complexion, another yellow bone. The name Twopence is a common one among Americans in King Williams County at a later date. Aside from Virginia, where persons descended from female Americans imported after a certain date could obtain their freedom, all slaves of American ancestry remained slaves throughout the entire duration of slavery until they were emancipated or ran away. At the end of the 18th century, Bob, a carpenter fellow of a yellowish complexion, musty, has bushy hair, ran away. He was said to speak more proper than Negroes in general. Virginia tax rolls and census records from the 1780s to the 1850 have numerous examples of people of Indian tribal identity being classified as free people of color or as mulattoes. In fact, the practice was almost universal. Nonetheless, some were also classified as FN, free Negro, or as B, black, in various records. In certain counties, such as Southampton in 1830, and in parts of Delaware, virtually all free non-whites were categorized as FN or free Negro, although enumerated under the free people of color column. These lists included people of the Nanticoke and other tribal groups. In a treaty with the Creek Nation, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs noted in 1832, An Indian, whether a full or half blood, who has a female slave living with him as his wife. Listen, listen. This is patriarchy. This right here is patriarchy at its finest, where the man is God. The male is God. The male made the woman. This is what that is. That's why when you look into your census records and you see the male, the man as the head of the household, these people, your ancestors, they didn't come up with the column names. They were inserted into the column names. If you were a man and the head of your household, I'm sure none of you would call yourself the head of your household if you didn't have to. It would just be what it is. You would have a role to play in the relationship, and your woman would have a role to play in a relationship, and your children have a role to play in a relationship. It would be natural. Just like when an elephant has a baby, the elephant naturally teaches that baby elephant how to survive, what living is. Let's shake it. In a treaty with the Creek Nation, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs noted in 1832, an Indian, the commissioner in a treaty with the Creek Nation, very blanket statement, very blanket identification. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs noted in 1832, an Indian, whether a full or half blood, who has a female slave living with him as his wife, is the head of a family and entitled to a reservation of land. Also, free blacks who have been admitted as members of the Creek Nation and are regarded as such by the tribe, if they have families, are entitled to reservations of land. In North Carolina, many people of Lumbee Indian identity were categorized at times as Negroes. In Louisiana, in 1856, the Black Code was said to refer to offenses involving slaves, Indian, and free persons of color. Many narrative of ex-slaves recorded in the 1830s reveal Indian ancestry. One such person called an Indian was Uncle Mobile Hobson of Virginia. He says, "It come time to marry," and he married a black woman. "That make me black, I suppose." He say, "It come time to marry." One such person called an Indian was Uncle Mobile Hobson of Virginia. He says, "It come time to marry," and he married a black woman. "That make me black, I suppose." You see the way they wrote that? You see the way he wrote that? You see the language he's speaking? It's the same language you speak. They call it Ebonics. People put the label of Ebonics. People put the label of they want to make you think people like this, when they speak like this, when we speak like this, that it means that they was illiterate. They can't read and write. And they speak in real bad English. Not thinking that he's speaking American. And it had English sprinkled on it. This the South. got this picture in your head that when you mention the deep South or you mention the South, it's some so-called redneck. They talk like this, they talk like that. He says, it come time to marry, and he married a black woman. That make me black, I suppose. In 1871, a white writer of Maryland observed, in this Dorchester County of Indian Creek, some of the last Indians of the peninsula struck their wigwams toward the close of the last century, and there are now no full-blooded Aborigines on the eastern shore, although many of the free-born Negroes show Indian traces. Since many, but not all, Native Americans were brown. See, even Jack D. Forbes throws the Native Americans in there. This is very confusing. This is confusing. Pick something. He may be speaking about a particular time period, though, so I'll give him that. Since many, but not all, Native Americans were, and if you understand it, then it shouldn't confuse. It shouldn't be a problem. Understand what he's talking about. Since many, but not all, Native Americans were brown or dark colored without African ancestry. And, okay. Like I said, if he's talking about a particular time period, at some point, our understanding has to kick in. I hope. But when have you seen a brown or dark colored Native American? The people who are termed Native Americans today. There are no brown or dark colored ones. There are no copper colored ones. But this isn't about anyone in particular. This is about you. This is about you. This is about me. It's about our ancestors, our family. The ones who was here yesterday that's not here no more. The ones who don't want to be called something that they weren't, that they didn't call themselves. Since many, but not all, Native Americans were brown or dark colored without African ancestry, many of their descendants, when mixed only with African blood, would very likely be seen as Negroes by most Europeans, especially in North America, where special terms for such persons, such as Zambo, Griffo, Labo, Kafisa, Cabra, and Kabori, never became current and were where musty ceased to be used and mulatto changed its meaning. The United States Census also tended to expand the use of the term black and Negro. In 1890, black was to be used for all persons having 3/4 or more black blood. In 1910, black was supposed to be applied only to full-blooded Negroes, while the matter of who was an Indian was left to the enumerator. The term mulatto was to be used for all other persons having some portion. Let's do that again. Let's do it one more time. The United States Census also tended to expand the use of the terms black and Negro. In 1890, black was to be used for all persons having 3/4 or more black blood. In 1910, black was supposed to be applied only to full-blooded Negroes, while the matter of who was an Indian was left to the enumerator. The term mulatto was to be used for all other persons having some proportion or perceptible trace of Negro blood. It is certain that large numbers of Americans or part Americans were classified as Negro or mulatto under these rules. I concur. This has been my experience with reading census records. enrolled, as compared with the hundreds of thousands who were doubtless counted as Negro or mulatto because of living away from a federally recognized reservation area. In 1930, a person of mixed Indian and Negro blood shall be returned as a Negro unless the Indian blood predominates, and the status as an Indian is generally accepted in the community. By 1940, all African American hybrids were to be counted as Negroes unless the Indian ancestry very definitely predominates and he is universally accepted as an Indian if he looked like who was accepted. Even pureblood Indians could be counted as blacks, as in Nevada in 1880 when the census enumerator categorized 90 members of the Duckwater Shoshone tribe in that manner. In the state of Delaware, more recent decades found that if a person said he was an Indian, he was recorded as either black or white, depending upon his appearance. The instructions for the 1980 census indicated that any person checking both the black and Indian boxes was counted solely as black. Although in oral interviews, the race mentioned first for the mother of the respondent would be the one counted. More significantly, a long list of countries was supplied with census takers with the appropriate category to be counted instead of the country name. A large number of countries, including Trinidad and virtually all of the West Indies, were arbitrarily assigned to the black category. Thus, Americans or part Americans from Aruba, Trinidad, or Dominica would be counted as black. Not a single country was assigned to the Indian category, including Guatemala, Bolivia, Peru, Paraguay. Clearly, the census methods in 1980 had the effect of minimizing the count of Indians. It's funny, 1980s where we also are introduced more thoroughly to the term African American. It seems clear that many persons of Native American ancestry in whole or part have been at times classified as Negroes or blacks. To discover the actual ethnicity of persons so categorized, one must know the specific geographical location from which they were derived. Such a conclusion will come as no surprise to many people in Afro-American community or in American community of the United States who have long been aware of extensive Indian ancestry. From a scholarly perspective, the logic of evolving white racism arbitrary is neither the logic of genetics nor of bona fide ethnicity. Their myths, their prejudices, and their systems of classification and nomenclature must all be subjected to critical and empirical re-evaluation. The classification of human beings according to their skin color and other physical characteristics is a very important subject, but one which has yielded a great deal of confusion and controversy. Color terms native to a particular language seem to often be relatively indifferent to race, and a period in which emphasis was placed upon appearance as opposed to genealogy. In the 16th century, new terms for brown people and mixed bloods developed. The slave population was still ethnically very heterogeneous. But black Africans formed a higher percentage than in previous times. People continued to be described primarily in non-racial terms. For example, in Brazil, one finds the Americans being identified sometimes by village names and more often by national names such as Tupinamba, Tamayo, or Cariho. In addition, geographical or regional designations were employed, such as Brazilians for the Tupi-speaking nationalities and Tupuyas for non-Tupi-speaking groups. Still broader geographical names were also employed, such as Indio for people from Indias, the Americas. Africans were identified as Negros de Guinea or Escravos from Guinea. In addition, Americans were sometimes called negros, as noted previously, a term which seems to have sometimes denoted non-whites in general. After about 1552, Mameluco and Mestizo being used for mixed bloods, although on occasion half European mixed bloods were also called whites. Occasionally, also Americans were identified by color as being pardo or darkish, preto or black, but these terms were not yet used in any caste-like sense. On the other hand, most classification systems went beyond the strict needs of Iberian law in order to offer a rational structure for the fine gradations of phenotypical descriptions, which had no immediate relevance for legal status. In 1735, Carl Linnaeus published the first edition of his System of Nature. Living creatures were thereby logically arranged by genus, species, and variety. Human beings were divided into two species, Homo sapiens and Homo monstruous. Within Homo sapiens were placed wild men, Americans, copper colored, Europeans, fair, Asians, sooty, and Africans, black. Homo monstruous included Patagonians and flat-headed Canadians, both American groups, as well as Hottentots and Chinese. Contemporary scholarly and popular literature in the United States has largely ignored the significance of widespread Native American ancestry among Afro-Americans and also of African ancestry among many Native groups. The consequences of this neglect are far-reaching, and this is especially true in relation to studies of the evolution of music, folk tales, social organization, and other aspects of culture. First, there are a large number of biographies and autobiographies, as for example, of musicians or singers such as Adelaide Hall, Willie the Lion Smith, Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker, Bunk Johnson, Lena Horne, Pops Foster, George Lewis, Pearl Bailey, Lead Belly, Tina Turner, and others, all of which have specific reference to Native American ancestry. Secondly, there is Alman W. Lauber's Study of Indian Slavery in Colonial Times, 1913. As early as the late 19th century, the 19th annual report of the Bureau of American Ethnology noted that a considerable proportion of the blood of the Southern Negroes of the U.S. is unquestionably Indian. In an article published in the Journal of Negro History, Johnston remarked, Where the Negro was brought into contact with the American Indian, the blood of the two races intermingled. The Indian has not disappeared from the land, but is now part of the Negro population of the United States. The American Indian has not disappeared from the land. The American Indian is the Negro population of the United States. Some of y'all not. Some of us are. Helen T. Catterall, in her work on slavery in Virginia, noted that we have shown that the first slaves were Indians, not Negroes. Negro was becoming practically synonymous with slave. Mulattoes, musties, and free Negroes in 1789, South Carolina imposed a tax per head on all Negroes, mestizos, and mulattoes. And in 1792, the same state moved to prohibit bringing in slaves or Negroes, mulattoes, Indians, Moors, or mestizos bound for a term of years. Indians in amity with his government were accepted. Indians in amity with his government were accepted. Tens of thousands who had been shipped to Barbados and other colonies. Tens of thousands who had been shipped to Barbados and other colonies. The British brought in large numbers of additional Americans as slaves and servants. The British brought in large numbers of additional Americans as slaves and servants. The greater part from Central America, but probably many also from South Carolina, Virginia, and New England. In the decade after 1712, the British purchased more than 2,000 Catholic Indian and mestizo slaves from the Mosquito Indians of Nicaragua, and others were purchased from Indians in Darien, Panama. In the period 1674 to 1701, 51 out of 600 estates in Jamaica included Indian servants or slaves. American slaves were also taken from Jamaica to New York and Virginia in the 18th century. In spite of the agreement of most authorities that significant numbers of Americans were living and still live on that island. Thus, the term colored in Dutch could certainly embrace Americans. In the area of the United States, a tendency developed by the late 19th century to equate colored with Negro and to use both terms interchangeably. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and predecessor groups used the term in this way. John Russell Bartlett, in his Dictionary of Americanisms, circa 1860, defined colored as a term applied to persons who have Negro blood in their veins. This definition is not, however, in accord with earlier usage. In 1807, for example, the United States adopted an act to prohibit the importation of slaves. Generally speaking, it was left to the local census taker to distinguish between colored and uncolored. Quite clearly, however, all persons considered to be non-white were to be enumerated as colored persons, except for Indians who were not taxed. That is, Indians living on non-taxable lands who paid no property or poll taxes. Indians who participated, Native Americans who participated and who were groomed and who were indoctrinated. Let's shake it. In the 1850 census, enumerators were told, in enumerating colored persons, to write B or M in the spaces on the schedule. The B apparently stood for black or dark, while the M stood for mulatto, mixed, or brown. The same method was used in 1860. The vast majority of American Indian people in Virginia and North Carolina were classified as colored people in 1850, with an M being placed after their names. A few were classified as B for black. All other free people, or the free colored category that North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and other states chose to enumerate, most or all Indians as colored persons, must be seen as being in accord with the intentions of the United States government. In New England, it appears that many persons of American blood were classified as people of color, at least for census purposes. Thus, we have clear evidence that in Massachusetts, the term colored was used for tribal members and, on occasion at least, for entire Indian groups. The high probability also that Americans kidnapped reached Northern Europe in the 1000s and early 1400s, and the possibility that Americans from Newfoundland and elsewhere may have been taken to Portugal or other parts of Europe in the 1490s or even earlier. Nonetheless, the slave trade initiated by Columbus in the Caribbean and by the Portuguese in Brazil constituted a decisive stage in the escalation of African American contacts of an intensive nature. The presence of Native Americans or Americans in Europe and Africa in significant numbers from the 1490s onward has been overlooked by the scholarly world in general. Nonetheless, the subject is of very great significance indeed because of the tremendous American cultural impact upon both continents, especially in the horticultural realm. Now, however, we can demonstrate enough intensity of contact to allow for the diffusion of American techniques. For example, pipe making or cassava production, crops, ideas, individual freedom, utopian socialism, folklore, music, art, medicine, and so on. Not by some indirect means, but through direct American contact with Europe, within Europe and Africa. Evidence has been presented in the preceding pages to show that Columbus planned to sell American slaves to the African islands, controlled by Spain and Portugal, as early as the mid-1490s, and that it is extremely likely that the Portuguese began to use native Brazilians in Africa as early as the first decade of the 16th century. American contacts with Africa intensified as Angola and West Africa became ever more entwined with Brazil, and especially with the direct Dutch use of American auxiliary troops in the conquest of Angola, Ghana, and the Portuguese islands of the Gulf of Guinea, 1639 to 1640s. This illustration, which seems to be on some sort of canvas, I have no idea the year this illustration was done. I have no idea who the artist is or was. But the name of this illustration is North American Indians. Do the right thing.